Some people don't just live, they feel everything. They notice what no one else sees, suffer what no one else understands. While the world rushes by, they observe and see the invisible. They're old souls, intuitive introverts who carry centuries within a single gaze. They're not broken. They're too awake. Jung said that where there's light, there's also shadow. And these minds walk between both. But what happens when feeling too much becomes a burden? When the gift of understanding the invisible turns into pain? In this video, you'll understand why deep minds suffer and discover the hidden power behind this silent pain. Some people are born with the feeling that the world is too small for everything they think and feel. They're the intuitive introverts, described by Carl Jung as those whose consciousness turns inward, not as escape, but as instinct. From early on, they seem to carry an ancient memory as if they'd lived 1,000 lives before this one. While the world is still learning to name emotions, they already understand them with an almost frightening depth. And maybe that's why they never feel entirely from here. These minds perceive reality like someone listening to music on a different frequency. What's just coincidence to others is pattern, symbol, message to them. Everything holds meaning. Someone's look, the silence in a room, even a dream forgotten at dawn. But seeing so much is also a burden, because when your gaze goes deep, there's no way to pretend you didn't see. The intuitive introvert lives in constant dialogue with the invisible, and this dialogue sometimes distances them from the rest of the world. At school, in the family, in everyday conversations, they notice their worldview doesn't fit common frames. They talk about meaning, essence, soul, and others respond with laughter or discomfort. Little by little, they learn to silence what they feel, not for lack of words, but because they realize few are ready to hear them. This self-censorship creates a kind of silent loneliness, that of someone who understands much but is understood too little. And it's in this gap between feeling and being understood that the intuitive introvert begins their journey. They're born awake in a world still dreaming, and this mismatch transforms them into an observer and guardian of the depths. But they'll soon discover that seeing too much is a gift that comes at a steep price, because sensitivity, when not understood, can become an impossible weight to carry alone. The intuitive introvert's mind works like an antenna that never turns off. They perceive hidden intentions in words, subtle vibrations in an environment, and energy shifts that go unnoticed by everyone. Sometimes a single glance is enough to understand what the other person feels, even when the other doesn't understand themselves. It's a gift that seems magical, but can also be exhausting, because seeing too much is like watching life's movie in slow motion. Every detail weighs, every nuance hurts. For this type, sensitivity isn't a choice, it's structure. They read the world with their whole body. A mundane conversation can leave them drained, because while the other talks about trivialities, their mind decodes tones, gestures, hidden intentions. They notice what shouldn't be said and feel what no one has the courage to feel. Jung said that expanded consciousness is always accompanied by suffering. And maybe that's why the intuitive introvert lives tired, as if carrying the weight of emotions that aren't even theirs. Imagine walking into a space and sensing, before any word is spoken, what people are hiding. It's like walking through a field full of invisible emotional energy wires. They pick up the tension between a couple, a friend's disguised sadness, the envy behind a compliment. And while others go through life without noticing any of this, the intuitive absorbs everything without wanting to. Over time, they learn to smile on the outside while trying to protect themselves inside, faking normalcy in a world that doesn't understand their sensitivity. But there's a limit to how much you can feel. A moment comes when this hypersensitivity starts to blur with pain. The heart becomes an instrument out of tune between empathy and exhaustion. And it's at this point that many intuitive introverts begin to withdraw, not from weakness, but from survival. Isolation becomes a defense mechanism, a way to preserve what's left of their energy. And it's right there that the deepest mirror of all is born: loneliness. The intuitive introvert's loneliness isn't made just of silence. It has texture, weight, and even sound. It's the echo of a mind that sees too much in a world that speaks too little. They try to connect, but realize their conversations rarely move past the surface. Talking about what they really feel seems risky, like exposing themselves to a world that has no ears for the invisible. So they withdraw, not from coldness, but from not finding a place where their depth fits without being judged. Modern society values noise, rush, performance. While everyone runs to produce, the intuitive asks, produce what if the emptiness grows inside? This disconnect makes them seem strange, distant, or even cold in others' eyes. But actually, they're just protecting themselves. The noise exhausts them. The masks confuse them. They seek meaning, and meaning rarely shouts. It's in the pauses, the subtleties between the lines. The problem is, few know how to listen to this kind of silence. Over time, isolation stops being an option and becomes refuge. They start building internal worlds, mental places where they can breathe. They create refuges in art, in reading, in contemplation. Some write, others draw, others just watch the rain fall like someone conversing with their own unconscious. There is a strange beauty in this, a kind of secret communion between loneliness and soul. But there's also the danger of getting lost in this abyss and forgetting the outer world still exists. It's on this border between isolation and lucidity that something deep begins to transform. Because it's in loneliness that the intuitive faces the most relentless mirror, themselves. And when this mirror starts reflecting not just the inner world, but the child who once dreamed of the invisible, the past awakens, and the path of understanding becomes inevitable. From early on, the intuitive introvert seems to live in a world others don't see. While other kids run, laugh, and play, they observe. They observe the way light crosses through leaves, the silence that lives in the spaces between words, the mystery hidden behind a simple look. There's something in them that seems too old for their age, a kind of silent wisdom, as if they carried an ancient question no one else remembers to ask. As a child, they're enchanted by the invisible. They're more fascinated by why than how. They ask what's beyond death, what happens to dreams when we wake up, why people say the opposite of what they feel. These are questions that scare adults, who quickly tell them to stop thinking so much. But this type of soul doesn't turn off thought. They expand it. And it's there, in the solitary hours of childhood, that the archetype of the visionary begins to awaken. Many of these young people find refuge in imagination. They create entire worlds within themselves, talk to invisible characters, write stories about what they feel, not because they want to escape reality, but because they realize reality isn't enough. Some become voracious readers, others intuitive artists, others just attentive observers of human nature. It is as if from early on the unconscious whispers to them, "You came here to see what others don't see." But growing up with this sensitivity is walking on sacred and lonely ground. Little by little, this child realizes the gift of seeing the invisible also brings the burden of feeling it. What was once curiosity becomes exhaustion. What was fascination turns into weight. And without realizing it, the dream of understanding the world transforms into the struggle not to get lost inside it. A silent struggle, which will later be known as the secret language of pain. For those living immersed in the depths of their own mind, even the simple act of existing can be exhausting. The intuitive introvert doesn't just feel the world, they process it in multiple layers, translating every gesture, every look, every silence. While others hear words, they perceive intentions. While others speak, they read vibrations. It's like living with an emotional radar always on, picking up everything all the time. And what looks like empathy to others is actually also a kind of labyrinth with no exit. This constant sensitivity comes at a high price. There are days when the body is present, but the soul seems dragged down. The weight of accumulated perceptions becomes invisible but real. And the curious thing is, this exhaustion doesn't come from what's big, it comes from the trivial. A superficial conversation, a meeting without purpose, coexistence without truth. Because the intuitive doesn't know how to exist halfway. They feel the environment like an energy field, and when that field is shallow, they dry up inside. Over time, this exhaustion starts to look like discouragement, and many confuse this with weakness. But it's not lack of strength, it's excess of lucidity. When you see too much, it's hard to rest. It's like trying to sleep with all the lights on. And even if they want to disconnect, their mind continues deciphering what the collective unconscious screams between the lines of daily life. They see fear disguised as arrogance, emptiness dressed as success, pain hidden in smiles. And this, day after day, consumes them. Some find relief in art, others in silence, others in long walks where they can breathe away from human noise. Because those who live in the inner world need breaks to not get lost in it. But without realizing it, this emotional exhaustion begins to fulfill a mysterious role, that of awakening consciousness to something greater. And that's where Jung comes in with his symbolic gaze, seeing in these beings not just pain, but vocation to carry the world's unconscious. Carl Jung saw intuitive introverts as carriers of an ancestral sensitivity, messengers who serve as a bridge between the collective unconscious and the conscious world. They are beings who don't just perceive, but feel the hidden currents that cross through the human psyche. The pain they carry isn't entirely theirs. It's the reflection of a universal suffering, the echo of a world that hasn't yet found words for its wounds. That's why, when an intuitive introvert suffers, they suffer on behalf of something greater, the pain of a humanity trying to remember itself. These people, without knowing it, become guardians of symbols and archetypes seeking expression. Dreams, visions, synchronicities, everything seems to conspire to speak through them. They feel the weight of contrasts, the sacred and the profane, the light and the shadow, the human and the divine. Jung said they're living bridges between two worlds, and that's exactly why their lives are so dense, so full of meanings others rarely see. Being a carrier of the unconscious is carrying a language few understand, and this creates loneliness, but also depth. However, this call is rarely accepted immediately. Most fight against it, trying to fit into the world's rhythm, suppressing perceptions that seem excessive or illogical. But the more they try to deny this nature, the more they feel the weight of emptiness. It's as if the unconscious knocked at the door, asking for passage. And when they finally surrender, something inside them awakens, an expanded consciousness that begins transforming pain into wisdom. Suffering then stops being punishment and becomes initiation. Jung believed these individuals are fundamental to the evolution of collective consciousness. They're the ones who translate the invisible into something comprehensible, who walk in the shadows to light fires where no one else dares to look. Their journey is lonely but deeply necessary. They suffer more because they feel more, and it is through this pain that they open paths for all of us, because by healing their own unconscious, they also help the world remember what was forgotten. The intuitive introvert's suffering shouldn't be fought, but understood. Within the pain, there's a sacred language waiting to be deciphered. When they try to suppress what they feel, this type of person fragments. But when they choose to listen to what the pain wants to reveal, something deep organizes itself. Jung said the psyche is self-sufficient and seeks on its own wholeness. And it's in this movement of self-regeneration that healing is born. Internal chaos instead of enemy becomes raw material for transformation. It's the soul's fire, asking to be molded into consciousness. Art, writing, silence, and service to others are symbolic paths to liberation. Each form of expression becomes a bridge between the invisible and the real world. The intuitive introvert heals when they create, when they translate the unspeakable into image, sound, word, or gesture. What was once an insurmountable weight converts into creative force capable of inspiring others. It's not just catharsis, it's transmutation, because every time they transform pain into beauty, unconscious into expression, they contribute to the collective's healing. This process, however, requires courage to remain in discomfort. Creating from the soul is walking on ashes. It's transforming wounds into symbols. Jung called this inner alchemical work. The act of distilling pain leads into spiritual gold. The intuitive introvert, when accepting this task, becomes an artist of the invisible. They learn that meaning isn't in avoiding suffering, but in giving it form. It's from this silent alchemy that true creative power emerges, the kind born from integration, not escape. And when this transformation happens, life stops being just a field of internal battles. The person starts to realize their suffering always had a purpose to teach them the language of the soul. By reconciling with their own chaos, the intuitive introvert discovers that within them exists an inexhaustible source of beauty and wisdom, and what once isolated them from the world now connects them to all beings. Because when they create from pain, they're not just speaking for themselves, they're speaking for all of us. True healing begins when the intuitive introvert stops measuring their life by external standards and learns to inhabit their own depth. For a long time, they tried to adapt to a world that values extroversion, speed, and superficiality. But the more they try to fit in, the more they feel something essential is lost. The awakening happens when they realize their difference was never a defect. It was a calling. Jung said the encounter with the soul is the greatest of all adventures, and it's exactly in this inward dive that the intuitive finds peace. Loneliness, once felt as punishment, transforms into a sacred altar. It's in silence they hear the psyche's voice, that invisible intelligence that always tried to guide them. There they discover that each fragment of pain contained a lesson, and that each rupture led them back to wholeness. The sensitivity that once made them suffer now reveals itself as a gift, the capacity to perceive the invisible, to touch what's beyond words. They're not weak for feeling too much. They're strong for having remained faithful to their own soul in a world that teaches them to deny feeling. At this point in the journey, introspection stops being refuge and becomes source. The intuitive begins to nourish themselves from what once drained them, finding beauty in nuances, in pauses, between the lines. They understand that strength isn't in resisting their own flow, but in flowing with it. Instead of fighting against what is, they learn to cooperate with life's mystery. This surrender makes them more serene, more whole, more true. They no longer seek to be understood, they seek to understand. And this subtle shift is, in itself, a rebirth. In the end, what once seemed like weakness reveals itself as wisdom. The intuitive introvert awakens to the truth that their depth is their greatest strength. They understand the purpose isn't to escape the world, but to illuminate it with the clarity of someone who's already walked inside the shadow. And when they look back, they realize all the suffering was a disguised teacher, guiding them to meet themselves. This is the silent awakening, the moment when the sensitive becomes wise, and the sun finally rises within the soul. If you made it this far, it's because you feel the world in a way few understand. Maybe you've already tried to fix yourself, silence what you feel, or disguise the intensity you carry inside. But deep down, you know that's impossible. Because this depth isn't a mistake, it's your gift. And the more you try to hide it, the more it cries out to be lived. The suffering that shaped you didn't come to punish you, it came to reveal you. It's the secret passage to something the superficial world would never understand, the awakening of your own soul. So the question is, what are you going to do with all this now? Will you keep trying to fit into a world that speaks too quietly for what you feel? Or will you transform this sensitivity into strength, creating, healing, inspiring, and being exactly who you are? The choice is yours, but remember, the world needs people who feel deeply, because they're the ones who transform the invisible into meaning. If this video spoke to you, share in the comments what touched your soul the most. I read every single one. And if you want to keep diving into this kind of knowledge, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here every week, you'll find reflections that feed the mind and spirit. And now, before you go, here's an invitation. Watch the video showing on your screen. It deepens exactly the next step of this journey, where pain transforms into wisdom and the soul finally learns to breathe within its own silence.